Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a genuinely polarizing topic, one that really forces us to weigh human safety against marine conservation. The long-running messy debate over New South Wales Shark Meshing Program, or SMP. And this isn't just some local policy fight. It's like a global microcosm of how we decide what lives, what dies, and whose safety comes first. If you're trying to quickly grasp why this issue generates so much more heat than light, you've definitely come to the right place.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today is to go, a bit beyond the typical media sound bites. We're not just going to summarize the familiar arguments for and against shark nets.
Right.
We are actually going to use a surprising conceptual tool, a kind of psychological and philosophical framework to understand why this debate is so emotionally charged and how that emotion just completely distorts the scientific facts we have.
Okay, let's unpack that framework first. Because on the surface, the traditional view, the official hierarchy here, seems pretty straightforward. Human safety is paramount. The state has a responsibility to protect beachgoers, and dangerous sharks in this very specific context are, well, expendable if they pose a direct threat. That's the government line.
Exactly. But what we see playing out pretty consistently in public is this massive conscious inversion of that hierarchy. Conservationists, activists, they've created what we could call a carnival crowd rhetoric. They flip the script.
Flip the script how?
They assert that mankind is the real monster, destroying the ecosystem. And the sharks and all the innocent bycatch caught in the nets, they're the actual victims who need protection from us.
That structural reversal is fascinating. It's a lens to view the whole thing through. We need to dive into this idea, the Carnivalesque. Where does that come from? And how does it relate to coastal safety?
So we're pulling this concept from a brilliant literary theorist, Mikhail Bakhtin. The Carnivalesque is, at its heart, about the temporary suspension and, crucially, the public reversal of established hierarchies. Social, moral, political.
Okay, so like a big festival where all the normal rules are deliberately broken.
Exactly. Think of it like that. The beggar gets to wear the king's crown for a day, and the king is, subjected to public ridicule.
It's a social pressure release valve, then, sort of like the ancient ritual of the crowning and decrowning of a king.
Precisely. And the power of this ritual, Bakhtin said, is that it expresses the joyful relativity of all authority. When you take part in this, it offers this profound, if temporary, sense of liberation from authority figures.
Whether that's the government putting in the nets or even the whole Judeo-Christian idea that places humans above animals.
Yes. It's deeply satisfying, on some level, to declare that the human came as a fool and the shark is the rightful inhabitant.
But here's where it gets really interesting and dark. Because shark attacks aren't a festival. They're not play acting. This inversion happens in the real world, where the consequences are lethal, permanent. That personal gratification you might get from decrowning mankind, from siding with nature over policy, it comes at this enormous, devastating cost to real people, to victims, their families, first responders.
That's the critical ethical collision. The tragic human cost just completely undermines that carnivalesque idea of renewal and liberation. When the festival ends, the king usually gets his throne back. But here, the inversion is permanent for the victim. It becomes a philosophical reversal with real legal consequences.
It makes you think of that warning from Nietzsche.
Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become a monster.
That quote perfectly frames the kind of extremism we see here. You can start out trying to protect the ocean, but you can end up with an ideology that is just overtly hostile to human life. Because when you look at how the most radical rhetoric frames human activity, especially something non-essential like surfing,
recreation, yeah,
the language is immediately loaded to just strip away any human claim to that space.
Oh, absolutely. They use phrases like, the ocean is the shark's domain. That phrase is not neutral. It's a key part of the rhetorical strategy. It subordinates the surfing lifestyle to the political goals of the environmental movement.
So by defining the ocean as belonging to the shark, they sort of conceptually colonize the space. They invalidate any human expectation of safety.
And some of the rhetoric goes way beyond just policy debate. It takes on this tone of, moral vengeance. You see the most extreme version of this inversion when people suggest fatal shark attacks are almost a welcome corrective, a necessary cleansing.
And that's where the debate becomes explicitly anti-human for some.
Yes. We pulled some documented examples from public forums, like Facebook comments reacting to shark calls. The sentiment was just raw. People said fatal attacks were nature's way of culling too many humans on this planet.
Wow.
Others suggested nature will regulate both sharks and people, or that it's just nature getting its own back after all the destruction we have done to this world.
I find those statements genuinely shocking. They move beyond environmentalism into this idea of what salvation through sustainability, where the planet has to be saved, even if that salvation means imposing a legal cost on specific innocent people.
And the deep, disturbing irony there is that this approach, which claims to be natural or scientifically superior, it actually ends up imitating a very human construct. A vengeful God punishing humanity for its sins. It's a moralizing agenda disguised as environmentalism, using the shark as a proxy for, I don't know, divine retribution.
So we've established this emotional battleground, this powerful urge to invoke the traditional hierarchy. If that emotion is driving the public argument, let's pivot and see what the scientific facts actually look like, because this is where things get really muddied by misinformation. Let's start with the most common data attack point: bycatch.
Right. And it's crucial to acknowledge upfront that seeing non-target species turtles, dolphins caught in nets is genuinely distressing. Visually, it's a powerful argument, but we have to put it in context or we just fall for the emotional framing. The quantity of bycatch in the SMP is, scientifically speaking, insignificant when compared to large-scale commercial fishing.
Wait, insignificant is a strong word, especially if you're talking about an endangered species. Can you clarify that?
I can, because the nets are only on about 50 beaches for 6 months of the year, with mandated checks. Commercial trawling operates year-round over huge areas of the ocean. When scientists look at total annual marine life mortality in the region, the percentage from SMP nets is extremely small. They are not threatening the overall stability of the wider ecosystem. Commercial fishing is the real threat there. But the nets are visible, they're easy to politicize.
That helps contextualize it. Okay, now let's address the common straw man argument. The claim that nets are totally ineffective because sharks can just swim around them, that they offer only a false sense of security.
That argument just fundamentally misrepresents the actual purpose of the nets. It's a point that always gets lost. The nets are not designed to be a solid, physical barrier like a cage. If they were, they'd be miles long.
So what is their purpose then?
Their primary purpose is twofold. First, to remove the locally dominant, most aggressive sharks, and second, more importantly, to alter the behavior of the remaining sharks so they avoid the area. The nets act as a deterrent. The result is fewer sharks near those beaches, which historically translates directly to fewer attacks.
And historically, we have compelling evidence for that, right? Evidence that often gets buried. We need to look at the analysis by Dudley back in 1997.
This is the critical foundational data. Dudley found that the annual number of shark bites in the NSW meshing region, it decreased by approximately 90% after the nets were deployed.
90%. Let that sink in.
It's a huge number. The average rate went from 0.35 bites per year before the nets between 1900 and 1937, all the way down to just 0.04 bites per year after the nets for nearly 60 years. That is dramatic, undeniable historical efficacy.
So if we have this massive documented 90% reduction, what on earth is fueling the modern controversy? Which brings us to the recent study, Huveniers et al., 2024, which is being weaponized by anti-net campaigners.
This is the study that's caused so much confusion. Huveniers and his colleagues, they compared shark interactions, so bites and sightings, at 51 netted beaches versus 78 non-netted beaches. And crucially, they only did this comparison within the Metro Sydney region over the 22 years since 2000.
And the headline finding, the one everyone grabbed, was that the study could not detect statistical differences in the number of interactions between the netted and non-netted beaches.
Which, if you just stop there, sounds terrible for the program. And of course, we saw immediate political fallout. A deputy chair of the NSW Legislative Council publicly misrepresented this, claiming the study concluded the nets do not work.
But the authors of the study did not say that, did they? They were much more cautious. They offered alternative explanations for why their comparison failed to find a difference.
Exactly. This is where the nuanced science gets flattened by politics. The authors offered 5 alternative explanations, and we need to look very closely at number 4. It's the key. They suggested the similarity could be due to 1, mitigation being at popular beaches, 2, more sharks naturally being at those beaches anyway, 3, nets not reducing local numbers enough.
And number 4?
Number 4, the nets reducing shark populations across the entire region, making mitigation similar across all beaches. And number 5 was just the rise in patrolled beaches.
Okay, item number 4 is the elephant in the room. If the nets have successfully reduced the shark population across the entire Sydney area, both netted and non-netted beaches, then comparing beaches within that region is a fundamentally flawed way to do it. You're just comparing two protected environments.
It completely undermines the internal comparison. If the program has been so successful it's cleansed the whole regional ecosystem, then the non-netted beach benefits just as much as the netted one. The study was looking in the wrong place for its control group.
And on misrepresentation, what about the deputy chair's other claim, that non-lethal measures are already proven to be effective alternatives?
Again, that is not what the science says. The Huvenier study makes no such claim. In fact, the authors explicitly say they recommend that additional monitoring of these gears for at least another 10 years is required to determine if there is evidence for any effect. So they're far from conclusive. It just confirms the political claims are running way ahead of the actual science.
This brings us to the ultimate piece of evidence that seems to confirm that regional effect, that item 4 explanation. If the regional effect is the key, then the comparison should have been between netted regions and completely non-netted regions.
Precisely. And fortunately, we have powerful visual data that provides that comparison. It comes from the NSW Smart Drumlines report. And remember, 4 of the co-authors of the Huvenier's paperwork for the Department of Primary Industries, so they had this information.
Okay, quick definition. What are smart drumlines?
A smart drumline is shark management alert in real time. It's not like the old lethal ones. It uses a baited hook, but it's attached to a satellite buoy. When a shark takes the bait, it sends an alert. Officials rush out, tag the shark, and release it offshore, non-lethally. So the report is based on all that catch and release data.
Perfect. So let's look at the regional findings from that drumline data. The difference in shark numbers between the long-term netted regions and the non-netted regions is, well, it's overwhelming.
It is the final nail in the coffin for the methodology of that 2024 study. When you analyze the catch data, especially for dangerous species like white, tiger, and bull sharks, in the non-netted regions up north, places like Kingscliff, Ballina, Coffs Harbor, they caught significantly higher numbers of sharks. It just shows a greater unmitigated shark abundance.
And then you compare that to the regions that have been netted for decades, Newcastle to Wollongong, including Manly and Bondi. What's the graph show there?
It shows dramatically fewer sharks being caught. This visual evidence strongly suggests that far fewer sharks are even present in those long-term netted regions. This regional effect is exactly what Explanation 4 proposed.
Right. The program has been so effective for so long that it has reduced the shark population across the whole Sydney area, which is why a localized comparison within that bubble failed to show a difference.
Exactly.
So the synthesis here is clear, and it connects right back to our initial idea. The historical data shows a massive 90% drop in attacks. The modern regional data shows low shark abundance in long-netted areas. And yet the public debate is just overwhelmingly driven by the rhetorical power of that Carnivalesque inversion, the emotional idea of decrowning mankind, rather than a rigorous look at the science.
It forces you, the listener, to step back and examine the core values at play. We started with the traditional hierarchy that prioritizes the sanctity of human life. We watched as activists invoke this powerful, vengeful rhetoric of nature getting its own back. When that line is crossed, where exactly is the boundary between legitimate environmental advocacy and an ideology that is willing to impose lethal costs on individual humans in pursuit of a perceived global salvation?
It's a question of who pays the highest price for the philosophy of the collective good, and whether we allow that ideology to override the historical record of what actually works to save human lives. We've given you the tools, the conceptual framework, the historical data, and the modern regional data that corrects the narrative. Now you can dive deeper into the rhetoric and the science yourself.